Thank you all for coming to tonight's work session in advance of tonight's City Council meeting on April 15th. They're going to pass it to the City Manager, who's going to kick us off for this discussion on the South Meeting House.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, as promised, we are bringing to you or teeing up the discussion about the potential disposition of the South Meeting House. And I appreciate that there are many folks in the room and watching on Zoom, but for those who are not as familiar with the building, there's a little bit of history and context in the City Manager comments of the packet for tonight's meeting, and I won't read all of them, but I'll sum it up to say the building is located at 280 Marcy Street. It includes 4,120 square feet of usable area and 20 parking spaces, and the city property card values the property total at $1.78 million. And as everybody knows and can appreciate, it has great historical significance. And we have the opportunity, as we did when the Children's Museum left, to reevaluate what's the highest and best use for this property. And by way of going down memory lane a little bit, in FY 2010, after the formation of a subcommittee by the Friends of the South End, the city allocated what it had on hand for Urban Development Action Grant funds, or UDAG funds, in the amount of over $200,000 to do some renovating to the building. And just so everybody knows, a quick understanding of UDAG is that we do not have to repay UDAG funds, but we would have to repay some of our community development block grant money that has been spent on the building, totaling a little over $70,000. So I just want to keep that in mind. Those are the city amounts spent to date from other sources. In addition, at that time, back in 2010, the Friends of the South End supported the renovation efforts with a contribution of just over $2,200, specifically for the removal of storm windows and the restoration of the frames to match the window trim. PPM TV, or Portsmouth Public Media, moved in 2010, and they have just moved out this past fall, and that's prompted this discussion. So the work that we understand needs to be done to the building, just to shore it up, just to keep it intact and safe for its next use, was outlined by our facilities director, Joe Almeida, and he's here with me tonight, along with Peter Britz, who can speak to zoning, Peter Rice, who can support the conversation relative to facilities, and we can take it from there. The zoning considerations are such that right now the building is in the municipal zoning district, and per section 10.433 of our zoning ordinance, if the property is owned or leased by the city, the property could be used for whatever the city council determines is in the best interest of the city. And for that reason, it's a policy decision by you as to how to treat the property as long as we continue to own it. If the council were to consider selling the building, the zoning designation would likely default to General Residence B, as it is completely surrounded by that district. And in General Residence B, for residential use, the GRB requires 5,000 square feet per dwelling unit, and the lot size is just over 10,000 square feet. So a duplex would be allowed by right, accommodating 2 units. A special exception could be made, however, there's not enough lot area per dwelling, so it may not make sense to talk about that option. A boarding house is not permitted. The staff has determined this use could include a club, fraternal, or service organization without lodging. So what we have tonight is an opportunity to weigh all possible options for appropriate reuse, and we should note at the outset that city management does not have an identified municipal use for the building. Right now, there are some departments temporarily storing items in the building, but then you may see folks come and go for that use. But Joe can attest that any user will need to value and the restoration and the historic preservation of the property. They need to contemplate a use that is compatible with the surrounding adjacencies and neighborhood. They need to be able to provide financial stability and take care of the operation and maintenance needs, and in short, be a good fit, be an appropriate fit. So at this juncture, given that we don't know of any identified municipal use that would make sense, we would recommend that the city issue a request for proposals to solicit interest and elicit conceptual proposals which could help identify a desired or ideal end use. There are many considerations that we would want to get your feedback on, and tonight could be the start of that conversation. And if you agree that the RFP route is the appropriate route, we would start to look for those parameters from you. Is it a sale? Is it a lease? Is it short-term? Is it long-term? Is it residential? What kind of needs does it have? And we would want to ensure that the plan, whatever plan that is achieved or desired, would include a long-term preservation and maintenance plan. So with that, staff is here to answer questions more than continue to talk. But we just know that we have a wonderful asset on our hands, and it's an opportunity for this council. Before I turn it back to you, Mayor, Joe, do you want to touch on anything that I haven't added?
No, that was very thorough, and obviously, you can't express enough how rich the history is of this building. It's truly an asset.
So with that, we will look to get some feedback from you all.
Assistant Mayor.
Thank you. Joe, could you go over a little bit in depth? Obviously, we have listed here, bulleted, some of the repairs that need to happen, but could you go over kind of timeline or rank of importance, and would we assume that the city is going to absorb these costs, or are we looking for potentially in an RFP, whatever proposals we get, that they would need to be mindful of these?
Well, I'll let the city manager speak to exactly where those funds might come from, but I can tell you that to get the building watertight, these are the critical items that the building needs, just to simply stabilize it, whether someone moves in or not, to be honest with you. Like the largest number there, the painting, the exterior restoration, was the result of an actual RFP that we sent out. So this is a very real number based on 3 competitive bids and an extensive RFP process. But that was a little over maybe a year and a half ago. So as we all know, I say this every time I'm before you, the costs continue to climb. We have been able to give the windows as much attention as we can without spending funds that we don't have, using our in-house carpenter and some of the materials that we have on hand to get the windows in a better condition to keep water out. But knowing a lot about historic windows, these are, and all of you who toured the building got a chance to put your hands right on the windows. They're in desperate need of a real restoration to keep them around for another 50 years. So this is why the costs of these items are so high. This is like taking care of an old wooden ship. It really is. This is a very unique building that requires unique materials and methods, and it comes at a cost.
And without identified funds specific to this property, what we would do is prioritize the needs that we find here out of the citywide facilities maintenance fund, which, as you know, is not nearly big enough to handle all of the priorities and needs of the existing city facilities.
Thank you.
Councilor Moreau.
I'm curious, would it be possible to do requests for proposals with parameters both for sale and for lease, so that we could make a determination based off of that actual proposal, whether or not it was worth continuing to own it and lease it out versus sell it?
I'm going to ask the deputy city attorney, can we put language like that in a procurement? How does that put us, in what kind of standing does that put us?
Sure. You could theoretically write something broad enough. The trouble is, when you write RFPs that are overly broad and lack specificity, you get perhaps less responsive proposals than if you write very specifically seeking what you want. The purpose is to let the public and potential proposers know exactly what you're looking for, and they're more likely to submit a proposal if they have a clear idea of what you want and think that they have a pretty good chance of winning if their costs are sufficiently low. So it's possible, but I can't say I'd recommend that.
Councilor Bagley.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just generally speaking, I would be opposed to the sale of city land, because I think we should not sell any city land in general unless we absolutely have to. That being said, this is an important historical building that is very expensive to upkeep. So my ideal situation is that we find a nonprofit that would have the financial wherewithal to do all these improvements, and then to find a suitable use that is compatible with the building. And I think it's best for the long term if this land remains in the ownership of the city. Now, that's not to preclude that we could do a 40-year land swap or something along those lines, but I wouldn't want to see us sell it outright.
Councilor Tabor.
Thanks, Your Honor. In the event of sale, this is registered with the National Registry of Historic Places, right?
Yes.
So
Correct.
it's protected. That said, it's had a public purpose for hundreds of years. And I'm inclined that if we can lease it and a nonprofit can be in there that has a public benefit, I think that's consistent with the history of the building. Can we include that as a criteria in the RFP? Give positive weight to applicants who want to use it for public purpose, public benefit of some kind. I mean, to me, the criteria are the financial capacity of whoever takes it over. Is their balance sheet strong enough to maintain it as they lease it? And what's their purpose for it? Not that I'm necessarily opposed to somebody leasing it for a business office of some kind, or a small office. It's only 4,000 square feet, but it seems to me I would submit to us as a council that it'd be a good thing to continue it, having it benefit the whole community through some lease to a nonprofit. It could be arts groups, could be some other kind of nonprofit.
Councilor Blaylock.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify, the parking is included in whatever use we do decide, or, I know a lot of questions have come from public and stuff like that, and some of the public may have gotten used to using the parking while it was unoccupied, but I just wanted that to be clarified.
I think we would write the RFP with the inclusion of all 20 parking spaces in mind.
Any other questions? Councilor Cook?
Thank you, Your Honor. I wanted to highlight that this building is, again, a National Register building, and it's not just in the National Register in the downtown district, but it's in its own right in the National Register. I think that that's a really important consideration with regard to this building, because we have seen other buildings that are in the National Register downtown district that have been demolished because of lack of maintenance. And I think that we need to be very mindful of that when we're talking about this building. So in that sense, I would not support anyone selling the building to anyone else. I think that the city should maintain control of the building and therefore maintain control over improvements to the building, so we don't take a risk with a building that is such a critical historic building in not just this neighborhood, but for the entire city.
Councilor Blaylock.
Thank you. I completely agree with Councilor Cook's statement. And I've seen on the HTC, some buildings get demolished by neglect or just by not being fully responsibly sealing the building and taking care of it. I was lucky to do a tour and climbed all the way up to the clock tower and even went above the clock tower to the bell tower. But I saw where the water seeps in and how old it is. And me as being a professional painter on the side, it was one of the not the best jobs I've seen, in the recent. So it definitely needs some work. Whoever was going to be the tenant, I would hope, because usually when we do lease it out to a nonprofit, it's their responsibility to maintain the building. So I would hope the next tenant would take that responsibility on and fully own it.
So maybe on that point, City Manager, can you explain to the council and the public how the previous arrangement worked in terms of the payment in lieu?
Sure.
And then maybe how it stopped working towards some of those improvements that were slated to be completed.
Right. Happy to. So in the case of many of our city properties where we lease to a nonprofit, the concept that is incorporated into the lease, and I'll look to Trevor to make sure I say this correctly, is that the nonprofit has the obligation to pay what amounts to what they would pay for property taxes to maintain, from a capital perspective, the property. And in the case of South Meeting House, the last number I believe I remember was about $26,000 that would have been paid in property tax was the obligation of Portsmouth Public Media to make those improvements. And it became increasingly difficult for them to meet that requirement. And there are others that do, that have balance sheets that allow them to do that. And that's really the challenge. And that would have really just been the bare bones meeting the obligation. And as Joe outlines, we could point to almost $500,000 right now in improvements that would make the building suitable year-round, comfortable, climate-controlled, and structurally sound.
Councilor Bagley, then Councilor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Councilor
And I think that, in my opinion, the payment in lieu has not been a great success in a number of cases. So I think we should look for a new framework, and I think we should make sure that the balance sheet or the financial soundness is there so that people can, maintain this building. I wouldn't want to see us end up in a situation where we end up, 10 years from now, some council has to dump another $500,000 in because the building wasn't maintained. So I would put a lot of credence towards what is the actual financial capability of whoever might get the lease.
Councilor Cook and then Councilor Tabor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do we have any idea yet what the valuation might be after reevaluation on this building this spring?
Premature to say would be my appropriate answer at this time.
Okay, and then I have one second question. What do we think that ongoing maintenance cost would be on an annual basis after the $500,000 approximately done in work is completed?
So I have several, being the facilities manager, I maintain all these buildings. We have several nonprofit tenants. Some of them take amazing care of their building because it's very dependent on the building itself and its ability to be taken care of and its condition. This particular building, just the sheer size of it and the age of it, requires so much more. I wasn't joking when I said, several of us here, including yourself, Councilor, live in very old homes. I do as well, 300-year-old house. It's constant. It's absolutely constant. Unless you do the deepest of renovations where you're removing everything and starting over, and we couldn't afford to do that on this building. So I hesitate to just come up with a number here, but it's significant. If we had to maintain this building annually, I would want at least $75,000 a year to maintain this building.
Councilor Tabor.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to remember that $500,000 is just the catch-up maintenance. If anybody wants to move in and fit it out for a new purpose,
Correct.
I had the opportunity to tour along with everyone else. The current space is a real hodgepodge.
Yep.
So there's hundreds of thousands of dollars to fit it out, to make it useful for a new purpose. So, but I think Councilor Cook's question is a great one, the ongoing costs. We have to look at any applicant and see if they can swing that.
Yeah.
That's vital.
The other very unique thing about the building, obviously, is the clock. The clock has its own history, and it's an amazing history. We have, luckily, we have someone who we contract with to take care of that very historic clock, you've all saw it up close. That's a very unique feature of the building that requires a lot of cooperation from the tenant. And if there are ever any significant damage or maintenance of that clock, then that comes at a cost for sure.
Your Honor, if I may, one other alternative to looking at this, rather than pay what, in lieu of what property taxes would amount to, would be something along the lines of the rate structure we offer the tenants at Community Campus, where we took that building over to maintain a subsidized level of rent for the nonprofit tenants. We could do something similar in this building. It's something to consider.
Councilor Cook.
Thank you, Your Honor, again. So when we get to the RFP process, whatever that looks like, will we be offering tours to potential bidders so that they can see the condition of the building?
I would imagine in the same way we have pre-bid conferences,
Yeah.
we would need to do that.
And the tour would be a lot deeper than the tours that we conducted recently, because I would want them to see into the basements, the crawl spaces and all the dirt basements, to look at the HVAC system closely. It's has stickers on it that say 1986, so it certainly lived its life. I'd want them to see the attics, the lack of no insulation, all of it. It would be a much more detailed tour.
And I have a follow-up question on parking as well. I know that this is going to be a point of contention in this neighborhood in particular, because this neighborhood probably has less public parking than any other residential neighborhood in the community. And that has been public accessible parking, at least on one side of the building, for a significant period of time. And neighbors are, I guess, quite accustomed to that. And we've also removed parking recently on Mechanic Street, which was one of the other few places that was available for street parking in the neighborhood. Is there a possibility that some of the parking is separated from the RFP for the entire building if we have a bidder that is not interested in using all of the parking on site?
I think that would be a policy decision of the council, quite frankly. It worked out such that Portsmouth Public Media only needed 5 of the spaces directly related to what they had for operations.
Yeah, in our discussions about on-site, potential tenant might not use the parking spaces at night, for example. That's possible. And an agreement could be.
Counselor Tabor.
Joe, to the degree you're comfortable, after the catch-up maintenance, if we were to use it for our own offices, what would you estimate we'd have to pay to deal with the old furnace, to change the space into something useful? I mean, would it be something like $500,000 deferred maintenance and another $500,000 to make it usable, or probably $1 million in all?
Depending on the use and the amount of spaces you're creating within those large open spaces. If there are several rooms you're creating, that's all circuitry, it's all branching of HVAC. We'd want air conditioning in the building, proper heat. We'd want to insulate it. And that's like the famous question when you're going to buy a car, how much are you looking to spend, right? The use would really dictate, but easily $1 million to fit that building out, easily,
Thanks.
yeah.
Assistant Mayor.
Thank you. Have we, as you were mentioning at Community Campus, we do a subsidized reduced rent for the nonprofits. Have we estimated what we think this space potentially could bring in based on rent if we were renting out the whole space?
Haven't gone that far, and it might be a function of how much build-out the tenant would be willing to do themselves versus expect the city to do. That's a whole different rate consideration. So I'll say that we have not gone that far
No.
in staff discussion.
One thing I found very interested in reading in depth into the history, and there's several sources, anyone can go online, and there's massive amounts of history on the building, is the city finds itself in this exact position over and over again.
Right.
So this is nothing new for the city. What do we do with this specific building? And it keeps getting saved, and it keeps getting
60s,
reused, and it keeps getting saved again. Yeah.
Counselor Blaylock.
Have the Children's Museum expressed any interest or have they been contacted?
I think they may have outgrown the space.
Yeah, it's pretty big over and over.
Couldn't hurt to ask.
So thus far, I'm getting a sense that there's a strong desire to preserve the building from the council. Also, to retain ownership is seemingly something that's strongly felt. Would an RFP process, what other aspects of an RFP would we need to include in terms of purpose? Is that
Use, sure, use. Let's see.
Duration?
Yep, duration, whether short or longer term,
And I guess a question for Mr. Almeida. Okay, I'll get you, Councilman Rowe. But did you glean anything in the history to avoid continually being in the process of a nonprofit leaving the building in a, having outgrown the space or not being able to keep up with the space in order to structure this better?
Did not find anything,
You didn't find anything, okay.
If you think about it, it's sort of the first example of an incubator. So if we are successful, we are incubating nonprofits. We are homes for groups that might find the space useful for a period of time. To Joe's point, we keep finding ourselves in this position. That's a nice position to have. So who's the next appropriate party?
Councilor Moreau?
If we did an RFP, I'd also want to make sure that we not only saw the upfront investment they might be willing to make into the property, what they want us to do, them to do, but also the long-term for the term of the lease.
Sure.
What the long-term schedule of maintenance and updates they would be actually considering or looking at doing.
Councilor Bagley?
Thank you, Aaron. And kind of to piggyback off of Councilor Moreau, just thinking about this, I wouldn't want to say, okay, we're only looking for these types of nonprofits or these types of uses, because I don't want to limit somebody that has a good idea that we don't think of. For me, it's making sure the building's maintained at the lowest possible cost to the city. And it might be worthwhile. I mean, do we want to see a 5-year lookout, a 10-year lookout? What's the right number of years? You know, what's your plan for the next? I mean, 10 years maybe is too long, but 5 years is maybe too short. I'm not sure. Maybe, Joe, you would have an idea of what would be a realistic.
I mean, if you're spending like $500,000, like, you'd want a somewhat significant lookout period to get that back.
Commercial leases are on average 5 years.
I don't think 10 years is unreasonable.
No.
Okay, so term of the lease, structuring the financials of that use, we don't have, I guess, as broadly as a community-driven use, since it's the history of the building. Is that amenable to the folks in the council? Okay. Councilor Tabor?
I was just thinking about the Discover Portsmouth Center, which has been a successful public-private partnership. And in addition to the ongoing maintenance of the building, the Portsmouth Historical Society did a capital campaign to raise the money they needed to bring the building up to snuff. So maybe something we want to have in the RFP is something to get the bidders to talk about their ability to get the upfront capital, whether that's their history of capital campaigns as a nonprofit, or whether they have they've identified major donors, something like that.
Councilor Cook?
Thank you, Your Honor. This building was originally reconstructed. It was one of the earliest buildings in the city, and then it I think was probably lost in fire at some point and reconstructed in 1863 as a place for the aldermen to meet. So it was very much a public building and open to the public as part of that community. And so it was the aldermen for that neighborhood initially, but it was also open then for public services and worship services. I would love to see a proposal for the building that involves some public use or some openness to the public. And the reason I say this, and I'm not a direct abutter of this building, but I do live around the corner from the building, so I walk by it very frequently. And it's been kind of a hole in the neighborhood for the last several years because it has been closed off, and there hasn't been any public access to that building. And this neighborhood has a lot of walking traffic, especially year-round, because everyone in the neighborhood walks quite a bit. But during the summer especially, there are a lot of people who come to the city who walk through this neighborhood because of its historic value. And the fact that there's this building that everyone's interested in, but there's no access to it, I think can be a little bit frustrating. So it would be nice if it was a little bit more welcoming and had some kind of aspect of it being open to some degree to the public.
Okay, so we have community and then open to the public, which would certainly support making that into the RFP. I think getting closer in on uses is difficult because then we, don't know what we don't know about a great idea that's out there. But I think those are two kind of guideposts there. Again, the financials, I think everybody's in agreement that they have to be strong to avoid the position that we are in where the maintenance is not kept up. Ultimately, and why we would consider lease over sale, though I'm sure we could structure some sale in a, do not demolish type covenants around that. But it does seem like we want some assurances that future communities are going to get to have the same discussions that we've had for 200 years on this building. So that seems like a lease as a preferred method of transfer in this RFP is where we're looking at. And frankly, that probably does open it up to more nonprofits because the private price tag of this parcel is likely to be much higher than what we would be able to receive from a lease. Okay. Wanted to leave some time for public comment because I know a lot of folks are out here. Are there any other questions of the council or something from the city manager?
Thank you.
All right. So if you just state your name and you don't have the timer, but 3 minutes in your hearts is still appreciated.
Good evening. Josh Stenton, 110 Brewery Lane. I'm here to speak on behalf and as commander of Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 168. We are the 168th oldest VFW post in the country, the oldest VFW post in New Hampshire, and have continued to serve veterans throughout our community. I want to first take this opportunity to dispel any unintentional misinformation or intentional disinformation regarding our intentions for the building if we were able to go through the RFP process and be selected. We do not have any intent of selling alcohol at the building. I know that's been a point of contention, which I've heard, and I want to make clear it would not be turned into something like the American Legion post. I'm not saying anything bad about the American Legion post, but we are not seeking to sell alcohol at that spot. That said, we are a 501c19 veteran service organization that's chartered by Congress, and I ask that any RFP be open to such 501c19 organizations and not just 501c3 more traditional nonprofit organizations. I also want to add that although the majority of the council has taken a look at the interior of the building, I did not take a look at the interior of the building. It's been over a decade since I've been in there, and I definitely like to applaud Councilor Cook and the direction that looks like the council is going in regarding anyone who's interested in the RFP process at some point being able to get a detailed look at the inside of the building. Just a couple quick thoughts when it comes to benefiting the community. Since taking over as commander of the post, in addition to organizing regular veterans events such as the laying of the wreath, the Memorial Day Parade, and the Veterans Day events, we've given $50,000 to the city of Portsmouth to create a $1,000 scholarship in perpetuity for graduating students. This past year, we spent $5,000 on sending roughly 700 care packages to deployed New Hampshire service members, and we were happy to host a barbecue up at the Veterans Home. And the reason why I'm saying all that is, again, the VFW is far more than just a bar, and we're not looking at establishing a bar where alcohol would be sold. But the most important thing that we do, and I'd like to encourage anyone listening, is we provide help to veterans needing help getting the benefits which they earned. Just as an example, one of the most noteworthy and best-known veterans of the past half-decade in Portsmouth, Harold Whitehouse, called me about a year ago. I knew that there's an issue because he was calling me. And in short term, our veteran service officer met with Harold. We went with him to his first appointment at the VA, and we were able to get him the benefits which he earned, which gave him a much better quality of life. So all we would look for, and again, this is to dispel any information out there, is a place for us to meet, relax, and continue to help veterans in the community. And with that said, we look forward to whatever RFP process that the council pursues. Again, please allow 501c19 organizations to participate. And regardless of who gets this property, I think it's safe to say that everyone wants to see it well maintained for a long time to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave. And in 2010, actually, the Children's Museum had gone out. I was a member of the Friends of the South End, and I was also a member of City Council at the time. And I asked to make sure that we really think about what was happening in this building. At that point, and the one thing that I didn't hear in the history is the Friends of the South End from Fosse gave that amount of money, but many others donated, especially to the clock tower. Not only did they donate, they were very active. We worked on the roof, to make sure that the right slates were there. The clock tower, I know Friends of the South End worked really hard to make sure the person that was going to fix it was able to do that. They were an integral point of the painting, not doing the painting, but making those decisions. So the community was very active. At that point, we were promised the same thing I'm hearing tonight. And I have to say, for a period of time, we even held our Fosse meetings in the facility. It was a more community space after it was fixed up. And then things just seemed to happen, and I'm not sure exactly what happened, but it happened, and it became the closed space that Councilor Cook talked about. So I do ask you, when you look at Portsmouth, all the pictures is part of the picture of Portsmouth. And I think we have to honor that picture. And I'm glad to hear that you're not going to sell it. I think you have to look at your lease agreement. I really feel that in 14 years it's deteriorated, given all the energy that went into it, that should have probably never deteriorated. I know, as someone that lives down there, like many people in this room, it is a constant against the world of the ocean and the winds. However, I think if it had been painted regularly, the eaves had been cleaned regularly, a multitude of things, it would have been in much better shape, and we probably wouldn't be having this conversation tonight. You would be talking about what the interior would look like. So I want you to be really, really clear in this RFP that people take care of it. And I've seen, like many of you, I've seen many communities take some of these older buildings and do a beautiful job at keeping them. You just have to go up to Bartlett Street and see one of the finest group that keeps their building. So I think the clear point has to be that RFP and making sure that the upkeep is kept. Because the Friends of the South End did a lot of work on this. And I have to say the city, I believe it was, when I looked at my emails, back to my emails, it was $225,000 that we were given by the U-Grade grant. So thank you, everyone, and I'm glad to see that you're moving forward and making sure that this is continues to be a pillar of our community in the historical venue.
Thank you, Esther.
I'd like to have 2 minutes to read a letter of intent we've submitted to the City Council on Saturday. Residents in the South End have created the South Meeting House Preservation Group, and
We just name an address real quickly.
260 Marcy Street.
And your name?
Jeff Doro.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you. So there was a letter of intent written by the South Meeting House Preservation Groups, specifically Shiva Nanda. He cannot be here today as he is overseas, so I'm writing this on his behalf. The South Meeting House Preservation Group have been discussing and meeting how best to preserve, repurpose South Meeting House that is in harmony with the neighborhood while maintaining the legacy, intent, and heritage of the building. It is the native beauty of spaces like South Meeting House that make Portsmouth the beautiful and charming community it is. In the process, we have met with multiple nonprofit entities involved in the arts. There is a need for space for many nonprofits, art space for local artists, and small diverse businesses that find it increasingly hard to rent space in the downtown and south end. From our experience as homeowners and in discussing with professionals, the current renovation costs in the neighborhood run between $200 and $500 per square foot, approximately $1 to $2 million for the South Meeting House. The South Meeting House Preservation Group would like to submit our formal intent in helping the city renovate, preserve, and repurpose South Meeting House in harmony with the neighborhood and community. If we align in purpose and structure, we will commit $1 billion towards the same. Our goal is to eliminate any financial burden to the city while maintaining the heritage, spirit, and purpose of the South Meeting House. If the city is not prepared, South Meeting House Preservation Group is prepared to undertake the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other speakers? Any other questions from the council? Okay, we will adjourn until 7 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you.